Hey folks, Alamatic the Hot Rod Hippie here. This week's video, backed by popular demand, we are getting back to some hammer forming, a slightly more complex project than the last couple that I've done, so let's get to it. The hammer forming project that I'm going to show you today is something that I've actually made for a project at work. It's a 58 Chevy Corvette fuel tank fuel line cover that I produced. By that I mean I put a Aeromotive Phantom fuel pump into an original 58 Corvette fuel tank to supply the LS3 engine in that car. Then the fuel lines, stainless steel lines that I plumbed off of it, they protruded up from the top of the tank and the original fuel tank cover would not fit anymore. I didn't want to make an entirely new cover for the fuel tank, just for some fuel lines that were slightly raised up in a certain area, so I decided to make just a raised area right around those lines, and the only way I could come up with to make it clean and fitted as tight to those lines as I could create it was with a good hammer form. Now this project will combine the principles from the previous two hammer forming videos that I did, shrinking and stretching. You can check out those in the link up here, unless you're on your phone, sorry that you won't see the links up here, but you can check the description down below to find those hammer forming videos. I would recommend you check those videos out before I get to this project because there's some principles in there that I'm not going to cover in this one. I don't need to retread every time I make a hammer forming video. Now I'm prepped up and ready for this project already. I've cut out my 18 gauge aluminum 3003 aluminum blank here for this project. I've got my hammer form that I produced previously. It's MDF, 2 layers of it glued together and shaped into the design that I need. I laid it out based off of the needs of the vehicle. The piece has a nice routed edge all the way around, so I can go ahead and hammer form around this to create the shape that I want with a pleasant little radius to the design. And I've got the clamp plate that goes on top with a couple of screw holes in it that are already put into the blank so that they will guide and hold this clamp plate in place the whole time, and then clamps will go on this as well. To create the blank, I used the method that I showed in my first video, just simply laying the form on top of sheet metal, taking a Sharpie and running all the way around the edge and adding a little bit to the outside of that line, keeping the line as I cut away from it so that I create the shape that I'm trying to create. You can see how it sticks around the form there. Got those holes in there already. I'm ready to go ahead and put the clamp plate on and screw it in place. Again, the screws are just to keep the metal and the clamp plate aligned to the hammer form. They're not really a clamp force thing. I guess if you put enough of them in there, it could be, but at the same point, that's just gonna create a mess you don't really want to deal with later, because that's a whole lot of holes you'll have to fill up, weld up when you're done. So now I've got my sheet metal on my hammer form, clamp plate locked down on it. It's not going anywhere, so it's going to stay where I want it while I'm hammering on it, and that's what's important here. Metal does have a tendency to want to slide around on the hammer form, especially as you're striking at it in a sideways motion, trying to form it down around that form, so these guides can be really handy. Sometimes I try to work without them, and it can work out, but they really do help to guide everything, keep it in location, so you don't have to readjust things as you keep going through this process. So now with this slightly more complex shape than just the round ones that I've showed you previously, there's a lot of things going on here. You have this outside radius out here. This outside radius is going to need to be shrunk. That material is going to have to come around there and shrink to create the finished shape. I also have these inside radiuses here where it comes from that outside radius down to the straight section. Those inside radius areas will just be stretching. They will be stretching out the material as I hammer into them. And then we have the straight section. The straight section is just going to be forming this metal around that hammer form. Straight, simple, nothing more to it than that. I've got my blocking mallet. I've got my hearing protection. Let's get to hammering. So as I'm hammer forming this piece, I'm working in stages. I'm gonna work all the way uniformly around this piece. I don't wanna focus on and finish one area, then move to the next. The idea is to uniformly bring that whole piece down around the form, bit by bit, increasing and aiming for a finished product as I go. So now I started hammering this around. You can see how the piece is starting to form around the hammer form. And around the areas where it needs shrinking, you can see you got high, low, high, low, high, low, these buckle points all the way around. That's where the actual shrinking is occurring. That's where the material, there's excess material in there, it needs to be shrunk around the hammer form. I just wanted to show you that before I just keep on hammering and start to work those out. Now you may notice as I hammer around this form, I'm striking in a downward glancing blow. The idea here is I want to manipulate the sheet metal and move it the direction that I intend the finished product to go, moving the sheet metal down around the form. If I was just striking perpendicular into the side of the form right at it, I would actually run the risk of having that sheet metal bulge up off of the form and kind of shape around the clamp block more so than down around the form itself like I want it to. Now that I've used the shaping mallet to get the major shape finished, I'm going to switch over to the steel-faced body hammers, my Snap-on flat face one, and my Martin Tools door skinning hammer to go ahead and finish off the piece, knock down the final little high spots, get it nice and tight to this form. The door skinning hammer is going to be great for getting to those inside radiuses because it has a fairly gentle radius to its faces. So when it came to using the steel hammers, I really very lightly struck on the material just to knock down a few little high spots and make it a little more uniform. That lighter force is all I needed because that hard steel against the aluminum, I didn't want to get too aggressive. As you see here, the finished product, what I've got here is formed down nicely around this piece. I'm happy with how it went, and honestly, it went quite quickly. It took a lot longer to make the form than it did to actually form the metal around it. So you can see this thing has turned out nice. I've got the nice radius edge all the way around. Now from where I cut this, it's a little uneven along this bottom edge, so I would just go around and knock down those high spots, make it uniform so it has a nice flat surface to weld to. So to create the finished product for that 1958 Chevy Corvette fuel tank cover, I bent some flanges on the sheet metal brake. I took those over to the shrinker stretcher setup, and I went ahead and shrunk and stretched those so that they followed this shape exactly. Then I clamped this piece to those flanges, and I welded the whole thing together, finished it off with just a little bit of hammer and dolly work and some grinding, and I had myself a nice finished product that created the shape I wanted and made it look like a nice stamped piece. It really does take some trial and error. I want to impart to you all the information I can, but at the end of the day, a lot of this I've figured out by feel. I've learned that that radius wasn't crisp enough, or that radius was too much, so that the material didn't form around it the way I wanted to. At the end of the day, the best thing that I can recommend for you is to just practice it, try it. Go pick up some MDF, go pick up some plywood, glue it together, cut out some shapes, and start hammering some sheet metal around it. Get a feel for what's happening here. Take a look at my videos, watch what I'm doing when I'm hammering on this metal, take the words that I'm throwing at you, but at the same regard, practice. Try it out. See how it works for you. That's the only way you're really gonna figure out what works for you or how this really works for your needs. Alright folks, go ahead and drop the video a like if you found it interesting. Let me know in the comments down below. Do you have a project you think hammer forming is right for? Maybe I can give you some pointers as to how that can work out for you. Do you think this was an interesting project, or what should I work on next? Let me know what you think. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel for more content like this every week. Thanks for coming around, folks. You can see this thing has turned out, oops,